Good morning. We've just concluded another House Democratic Caucus meeting where we were able to have an extensive discussion about the consequences of not watching Congress get its work done because we're just not going to be around. And it's difficult to say because we get elected to do work for the American people, but after finishing a 9-day recess where we were not in town, and seeing how we only have 3 days to go before these across-the-board, senseless cuts to services that each and every American depends upon about to take effect and slowly begin to strangle the opportunity for our economy to continue to grow and for Americans to continue to go back to work, we find ourselves in a position where in a short 2 days we're going to recess again without trying to deal with this meat-axe approach to budgeting. And so we had an important presentation by Gene Sperling, the President's economic director of his economic council. And we are, I think, in unison as members on the House Democratic side, ready to stay until we can get our work done. We believe that we can come up with a balanced bipartisan solution to the fiscal challenges our country faces, but we don't believe we have to cut and run and leave town right before the consequences of these across-the-board cuts are prepared to land on the heads of all American families. 4 years ago, if you'll recall, this country was hemorrhaging jobs. Some 800,000 Americans lost their job in 1 month, January 2009, the month that President Bush handed the keys to the White House to newly elected President Barack Obama. This past month, we saw over 160,000 new private sector jobs created, so more than 160,000 Americans went back to work. And in the past 3 years, more than 6 million Americans have gone back to work. That's progress. We need to continue that progress. And the last thing we can do is manufacture, put before the American public more crises that make it impossible for the American economy to really just launch and for the American people to know that they can hire more of their fellow Americans or to be secure in knowing that they'll have that job so they can then send their child to college or buy that home. It's time for us to get our work done. The President and Democrats have put a balanced bipartisan plan on the table. If our Republican colleagues don't like it, we would hope that they would put a balanced bipartisan plan on the table, and then we can get our work done. We're prepared to stay here until that happens because we don't think that we should let a mindless across-the-board cut on the services that people depend on take effect when this is simply a manufactured crisis. And with that, let me yield now to our leader who has led us in this fight to get the work done to the American public.
I thank the chairman and the vice chair of the caucus, Mr. Crowley, for bringing us together this morning to hear a report from the White House about the impact of sequester on our economy and on jobs and how it affects individuals in our country. We've just come back from, a 10-day break. We've listened to members as to what they heard from the public, and what our constituents are telling us is to get the job done. We're doing just that with a proposal under the leadership of Chris Van Hollen, our ranking Democrat, on the Budget Committee. He'll talk about our proposal, which we have had on the table for a while. Our chairman talked about jobs. Month after month after month of private sector job increases, remarkable, that can be reversed if we have this sequester, which is harmful to growth and harmful to job creation, in addition to being harmful. For example, members told me about psychiatric nurses who deal with PTSD of our returning vets who will be furloughed. Is that what the American people want? I don't think so. We're practically, when you talk about jobs, that's one thing. When you talk about time, we've been gone for 10 days. We've come back. We'll be gone by Thursday at 3 o'clock when we have a deadline facing us. We're practically becoming a drive-by Congress when we have important work to do. The Republican leadership says, well, we passed bills last year. I remind them that was a different Congress. That doesn't count in this Congress. The Republican leadership says, let the Senate begin. I remind them that the Constitution says that appropriations and revenue bills must begin in the House. So we have important work to do. The American people want us to work together. We want something big, bold, balanced, and bipartisan that can take us. The Republicans say they're kicking the can down the road. It's not. I don't think they're even kicking the can down the road. I think they're nudging the potato across the table with their nose. There's not much that is being accomplished by what they are doing. This is just completely irresponsible. It's mindless. Most people don't even know what the word sequester means. Sequestration equals unemployment. Sequestration, we don't want it. And we can work here to make sure we get the job done. So again, I salute the President for taking the message to the American people. I believe what the Republicans are doing with their sequestration, one deadline after another, little deadline after another, is a subterfuge to not getting the work done. We want to pass immigration reform. We want to pass gun safety legislation. We want to create jobs. We have our important work to do here. We really do have a day job instead of just this job of avoidance behavior that the Republicans are putting forth. So again, let's be positive. Let's take the lead of Mr. Van Hollen or Patty Murray in the Senate with proposals that cut spending, increase revenue, create growth with jobs. Yield back.
Jim Clyburn, our Assistant Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Leader, thank you very much. Pushing the potato across the table.
With the nose.
That's great. Fair and balance. Fair and balance. It's a term our Republican friends are very familiar with. In fact, it's the motto of their favorite source for news. But for some strange reason, that when it comes to governance, they seem to not have a great deal of respect for that approach. All Democrats are asking for is for there to be a fair and balanced approach to avoiding sequestration. Now, you may recall that when the Budget Control Act was passed, I think Mr. Boehner said he was very pleased with it because he got 98% of what he wanted. The fact of the matter is that Budget Control Act had in it about $1.4 trillion in cuts. Now, we came back later, last year, did around $600 billion in revenue. It is now time for us to come to the table and put both cuts and revenue on the table so that we can move forward in a fair and balanced way. The President has laid out some proposals. Not to say that I am pleased with everything that he's laid out. The fact of the matter is that may be one reason that it can be called fair and balanced. I believe the time has come for our Republican friends to get serious about what cuts are. I do not understand how closing loopholes that favor big oil companies that are making record profits can be called a tax increase. I don't see how eliminating these tax preferences for things like corporate jets can be considered fair when we are asking seniors to give up some of their security, and when we're asking young people to postpone their educational pursuits. That's not the way to offer the American people a fair and balanced approach. So we believe that we ought to stay here until we do something that will be fair and balanced and get us beyond this manufacturing crisis that seems to be revisited every 3 months. And with that, I'd like to yield to the Vice Chair of the caucus, Mr. Crowley.
Thank you, Jim. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you cut it, these automatic spending cuts will be devastating to the American economy. We know it, the House Democrats know it, and a majority of the American people know it. In a recent poll, 60%, although they may not understand exactly what sequestration is, they know that these spending cuts will be devastating to our economy. And I think you have to ask yourselves a couple of questions. One is, do our Republican colleagues listen to their constituents? Because I know when I go back to my constituency, they're asking me about the 800,000 people who potentially be laid off from the Department of Defense, what impact that will have during a time of war. My colleagues are asking, my constituents are asking me about longer lines at the airport because TSA employees will be furloughed. They're talking to us about food inspectors and the quality of food inspection when people begin to be laid off from food inspection. Those are the kinds of questions our constituents are asking us. I don't know what world my Republican colleagues are living in if they're not hearing from those constituents. These cuts, automatic cuts, will be devastating, will have an effect. It may take some time for it to roll out, but leave no doubt they will have an incredibly debilitating effect on the economy. And one other question I have to ask. Why is it when America seems to be getting its footing on the ground and the economy beginning to improve, do we once again have another crisis, another man-made crisis in this case, that our Republican colleagues have created for us? We have a fair and balanced plan, as Mr. Clyburn has said. House Democrats have it, and Senate Democrats have a fair and balanced plan. Let's do it, and let's take this cliff away from the American people. And with that, I'll turn it over to the ranking member of the Budget Committee, Chris Van Hollen.
Thanks, Joe. As my colleague said, but it bears emphasis, sequester is Washington speak for massive job loss. That's not the president's number. That's not our number. That's what the independent, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says will happen between March 1st of this year and the end of this year if you allow sequestration to go for the remainder of the year. 750,000 American jobs lost, 1/3 less economic output in this country for the rest of this year. That is a huge hit on jobs in the economy when we're still trying to move the economy forward. So you would think that we would all be able to unite behind a solution or at least have a vote on a proposed solution. And House Democrats have put forward a solution that accomplishes the same amount of long-term deficit reduction without losing 750,000 jobs. And we do it in a balanced way through a combination of cutting spending. For example, we cut the excessive subsidies to ag programs in the form of direct payments. And we cut some of the spending in the tax code that's going to special interests. So we get rid of the special tax breaks for big oil companies. And we ask very wealthy individuals, people making $2 million more of a year, to have their tax preferences limited. So they're not paying a lower effective tax rate than the people who work for them. So that's our alternative. And you can like it or not like it, but at least give us a vote on that in the House of Representatives. At least let the American public see whether you prefer that alternative that we've put forward to 750,000 jobs lost. And so this afternoon, we'll go to the Rules Committee in the House for the third time this year and ask for an up or down vote on that balanced alternative to the sequester. 3 times. Whereas our Republican colleagues, how many times have they proposed a solution this Congress, this year? 0. 0 times. So we should be focused on solutions. At least let us have a vote on an alternative to prevent 750,000 American jobs from being lost.
Before we go to questions, I just want to add one quick point. My understanding is that Speaker John Boehner just said in my press conference or somewhere publicly that the House has done its work, that House Republicans have done what they need to do on the sequester, and therefore they're done. And he used some pretty colorful language to say now it's up to the Senate to get its work done. Let me just debunk that right now. There is no bill that the House of Representatives has passed under this Republican leadership that can go to the Senate that will stop these mindless cuts to people's services from taking effect. Speaker Boehner may be talking about legislation that was very partisan that the House of Representatives under Republican leadership passed last year. But I don't think I need to give the Speaker a lesson in legislating or how government runs. But whatever was done last year that didn't get signed into law has evaporated. It is gone. It does not exist. This is a new year, a new session of Congress, and it's time for everyone to get to work. The House Republican leadership must get to work in giving people a balanced bipartisan plan. And it's not enough to say we did something in the past. It's about what we do today for our future. And with that, we'll take some questions. Yes.
There's acknowledgement among many members and staffers that there won't be a solution to the sequester this week, but they're talking about doing some sort of fix in the continuing resolution, possibly allowing agencies to choose which cuts should happen, maybe just in defense and veterans affairs, maybe across the board. Would you support that approach if there's no resolution this week on sequester?
Well, first, I just want to emphasize again. I mean, we skipped over to this Friday, assuming that this issue is not going to be solved. I would just again emphasize the fact that today, in the House, for the third time this year, we will ask for a vote on an alternative. We're not asking Speaker Boehner to vote for it. We'd love his vote for a balanced approach. We just want to vote. So we could solve this problem today if we could have an up or down vote. Now, I want to go back to the Congressional Budget Office. What they said is that we will lose 750,000 American jobs if you make these cuts as deeply and in such a compressed time period as would be called for under the proposal you're talking about. Rearranging the cuts is simply like rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. The economy gets hit either way, and 750,000 Americans lose their jobs either way, and we don't want 750,000 Americans to lose their jobs.
Let me, if I can just add, you're talking 1.2 trillion over 10 years. You average it $1 trillion this year. Of $100 billion this year, $100 billion. Head Start is $8 billion total. So it's not a matter of making smart cuts here and you're done. No, you're going to choose. If you're asking us to choose, do we want to eliminate school opportunities for our children or healthcare opportunities for our children? That's not a choice. The smart choice is to do budgeting the right way. And the right way is not to work with these mindless across-the-board cuts that are going to hurt people's services. And so we're prepared, as our ranking member on the Budget Committee, Mr. Van Hollen, just said, to put a balanced approach that does exactly the same thing in terms of savings as would do the so-called sequester, but at least it does it in a smart way that lets us continue to create jobs for America and doesn't devastate our kids or our seniors or our public safety or our food safety. Other questions?
I think I'll turn it to Chris on this. I think Chris has made it clear. We have an alternative that's a balanced alternative that will not include the cutting of over 700,000 jobs. And I'll let Chris maybe go into more detail.
The difference is, and we have followed the approach of various bipartisan commissions, which is that in order to avoid hurting the economy and hurting jobs, you don't make massive cuts over a short period of time. You do it in a targeted way over a longer period of time, and that way you don't hurt the economy. you do it in a way that spreads the cuts out. So you achieve the same total deficit reduction, but you don't do it in a way that hurts the economy. And on the tax loopholes, what we're saying is that's just another form of spending in the tax code. I mean, if we were to give one of your networks a tax break, or one of your cable channels a tax break, that's like handing taxpayer money over to them. So closing a tax loophole or tax break is just ending spending that's taking place through the tax code. And there's some of that spending that we think is unnecessary, as Mr. Clyburn said. Tax subsidies for big oil companies. For goodness sakes, President George Bush proposed eliminating tax breaks for the big oil companies. So we would prefer to do that in combination with smart cuts than the kind of cuts that the chairman of our caucus mentioned, cuts to Head Start for kids or programs that help kids get a healthy start.
Two last questions.
You replacing 1 year's worth of cuts with deficit reduction over 10 years, so isn't the deficit reduction total less than what the sequestration?
No, what we're doing is we're replacing the sequestration cut level for this year over a period of time, which is so you get the same amount of deficit reduction than you would get for sequestration from March to the end of the calendar year. But you avoid the negative impact to jobs and the economy by spreading those cuts out over a period of time. And we'd also argue doing it in a much smarter way. The last point of clarification I want to make is that federal government employees, a lot of them will be furloughed, and that will create huge disruption in services. But the 750,000 jobs lost, those are not federal employee jobs. Those are jobs in the private sector. So people need to understand that. You're going to have federal employees who provide air traffic control services and meat and food safety inspection services. They will be furloughed, and that will create disruption in the economy. But the 750,000 jobs that the independent CBO says will be lost, those are American jobs in the private economy. And our plan avoids those job losses but still gets the same deficit reduction over the 10-year period.
Last question.
I wanted to follow up on Jill's question because I know you said you want to vote on your replacement, but we're days away, and very few people up here think that the sequester is not inevitable. If it does go into effect, and you're looking at the kind of consequences you talked about, in that event, would you be open to giving the administration more flexibility on how to do the cuts than across the board?
I certainly would not be. As has been said here often, if you have 0.2, 0.02 cuts, that's one thing. The question is, what are you cutting? Will you cut the $8 billion out for Head Start? That's 100% for Head Start children. Or are you going to get rid of immunizations for children going to school? It puts everybody else, health, at danger. So this whole issue of giving the administration or cabinet members the ability to make these cuts is a false choice for us to make. We are the elected officials who the public sent here to make some tough decisions and to give direction to the executive branch of the government. This is our job to do, and we ought not be passing it on or attempting to pass it on to anybody else. This is not for the executive. This is for the legislative.
If I could just add to that, as I said in my opening statement, no matter how you cut this, no matter how you cut the budget, these across-the-board spending cuts, automatic spending cuts, will be devastating. So I don't buy into the principle either that giving flexibility will make any difference. The 750,000 private sector jobs will happen. They'll be lost. Furloughs, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of furloughs, will take place. So let's not create any illusions. And I think that's unfortunately what my Republican colleagues in the House continue to attempt to do, is to create the illusion to the American people that there's a way that we can do this in a less violent way. in a less harmful way. The harm will be done no matter what, and that's the message to the American people. They already know. They get it. As I said before, 60% of the American people in a recent poll recognize that so-called sequestration or these across-the-board cuts will have a very negative impact on our economy. And no matter how you slice it, no matter how you cut it, that's the case. Flexibility won't change that.
And I'll just add in closing that maybe some people didn't know, and maybe some folks here who report on it forgot, but when this sequester bill was passed into law, it was a time bomb that was booby-trapped intentionally so that it would never go into effect, because its consequences to the daily lives of people would be devastating. It would be harmful. And so tossing it to somebody else to try to dismantle this booby-trap bomb, time bomb, doesn't solve the problems when it comes to keeping people working. And so I hope one of the things that those of you in the media who help communicate to the American public what's going on will try to convey to them that this is scary, because it seems like in the Congress, the House Republicans are creating this atmosphere of constant crisis, manufactured crisis, one day to another, as the new normal of the way Congress functions. And that should not be the way we function, from one crisis to the next, manufactured by politicians. This is no longer a natural disaster. This is no longer an issue of the economy, the natural cycles of the economy putting us in this situation. These are manufactured crises by politicians. And we should not accept that we will now govern this country and this economy through this new normal that House Republicans have put on the table for us as members of Congress. We need to get our job done, and we should not let this bomb explode on anyone, whoever is being asked to try to dismantle it. With that, we thank you for being here.